Thanks.
Let me know when you're ready.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So so when Kayla and Aaron asked me to do this, they were asking to obviously cover political issues related to environment and sustainability, you know, how people can vote and improve the environment, and finding reliable but unbiased information on issues and candidates, and then some things to look for in the upcoming local elections, but also national elections, I assume too. So, and if we can also, since they suggested, I'll try to slip a few points in about not just Ohio and the national issues, but also some about Pennsylvania and New York. So, good to see everybody. And as Kayla's introduction noted, this is a big part of what I study these days. And as the case may be, my big issue way back when I was a graduate student that was fairly unique back then was the infectious disease, pandemics, and bioterrorism, and all the rest of that. But one thing I want to make a note of is that there is a strong connection between climate change and pandemic disease, including the COVID outbreak. And if we have time, I will be happy to talk about that a little bit more. But among other things, this gets to one of the big issues for political activism, one of the big issues of the day, which is the Green New Deal. And whatever you may think of the Green New Deal, in its element, it seeks a holistic combination of renewable energy, carbon reduction, social justice, and also economic justice. And one of the reasons that those things are bundled together, critics claim that it's just this liberal wish list, but the reason those are bundled together under the Green New Deal, which is, as you know, I'm sure all, is currently legislation before Congress, including, in addition to being just a general idea within the environmental movement, is because all of those issues really are tied together. Social justice has a big impact on the environment and also on the nature of fossil fuels pollution and other forms of pollution, including carbon pollution, obviously. And also economic injustice tends to be related to environmental damage, and then of course the issue of jobs. And the Green New Deal is, as I'll discuss briefly, one of the ideas of that is to make the transition from to renewable energy to 100% carbon neutrality. And one of the ways to do that is to create an enormous jobs program, much like the original New Deal back in the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt and the like, who put people back to work in the wake of the Great Depression, or during the Great Depression, and in doing so built a tremendous amount of the infrastructure that we enjoy today, including many national parks and rural electrification and dams and bridges and all sorts of stuff back then. And the idea now is to put people to work, to juice the economy by giving people jobs in these areas that will build the critical infrastructure needed to make this transition away from fossil fuels. So, I probably don't need to tell anybody here, climate change is an existential threat to humanity. It's not just another issue as it's sometimes portrayed, even by so-called liberals, but it is an existential threat. The world will not survive if we, and particularly humans' current status in the world, will not survive if we do not move toward carbon neutrality and fast. And the problem, of course, is that the research, which seemed to be pessimistic, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, is every day turning out to be an underestimation of the impacts. And so the climate, the Earth is turning out to be far more sensitive to these inputs, to the fastest rise in carbon emissions in the history of the world, virtually, with a couple major exceptions that happened millions or hundreds of millions ago, or even a billion years plus. But the humans are putting more carbon in the atmosphere faster than even many of those great extinction events millions and millions of years ago. This is the fastest geoengineering change, even compared to nature. So, so one of the things that I wanted to touch on related to the election is the fact that this is a big part of politics these days. It was swept under the rug. One of the things that some of you may realize implicitly is that major media, corporate media, tends not to want to talk about this issue much because it's perceived as partisan and they want to be perceived as neutral. But in doing so, of course, that essentially means that they bias toward the climate doubters and the climate skeptics, or even the climate denialists. And so a big part of what is going on now politically in terms of behind the scenes activism, as well as at the national, state, and local levels, is the activism to basically put this in people's faces. And you see this in a lot of different movements over history. The gay marriage movement, or just simply LGBTQ, et cetera, rights were not necessarily, and women's rights back at the turn of the century in the 1920s, those were not gained by politely asking for change. They were gained in part, or large measure, by open, overt activism and civil disobedience and things like that. And so one of the things that characterizes the new environmental movement now, as opposed to kind of the legacy environmental groups like Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters and Audubon Society and so forth, sort of the old organizations, which tend to, as the case may be, have an older membership in general, baby boomers and older, is that these new environmental groups like the Sunrise Movement are much more young people and much more focused on direct action to help stop climate change. And obviously, one of the things that you all have at stake is that your lives will be extremely disrupted if things continue as they are, and they already are going to be significantly disrupted, regardless. Even if we manage to do a quick move toward the zero carbon or significantly reduced carbon, much of this is already baked in the system. But the big issue that exists now is trying to prevent catastrophe, cataclysm, basically. We already see, the many natural disasters around the fires and the pollution and the hyper charged hurricanes on steroids that are picking up warm water from, abnormally warm water from the Gulf of Mexico and in the Pacific and so forth and so on. But another part of these movements now is directly to challenge those who are profiting from the continuation of the fossil fuels paradigm, which has been around for 100 years. The fossil fuels industry, or as many of us like to call it, the fossil fuels industrial complex, FFIC, which is kind of modeled after the idea of the military industrial complex that Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about back in the 1950s. But the fossil fuels industry is the richest industry in human history. And so it has tremendous political power still, even as it essentially is supporting a declining model, and a model that is not just undesirable, but also these days increasingly unprofitable, as I'll talk about in a second here. So, anyway, the idea of the sort of the new activism, should anybody choose to get involved in it, is to link all these issues together, because they are indeed linked at various levels, and an important part of being able to address this. Without social justice, there's no, you can't get people to buy in, and also poverty and discrimination and so forth are often characteristics of communities that are in the vicinity of fossil fuels operations and so forth. So anyway, if anybody wants to talk about Green New Deal, happy to. Obviously, a big part of this is also the energy transformation in general, right? Renewable energy. The International Energy Agency last week actually put out a report saying that the cost per megawatt of electricity now is cheaper all around the world, pretty much in almost every place in the world, because of or solar power, I should say, is cheaper than any other energy source worldwide for the first time. Used to be pockets in various places now, but it is cheaper than coal and gas and oil in terms of energy generation. And I want to also add as a side note that that one of the reasons that that the renewable energy is going to be even more cheap as time passes is that they are technologies. They're not products. They're not like oil and gas and coal, which have finite, predictable amounts of energy and pollution and so forth, depending on the quality and various other variables. But solar and wind and hydro even, and biomass and so forth, those are technologies, and the technologies are steadily improving. And so the successes that we see now are going to get much better, and in a short period of time, because there's now significant financial advantage to it. And so we could talk about that too. Also, the revolution in storage and batteries, basically, and other methods of storage is essentially making those previously unreliable or intermittent, as they say, sources like solar energy. When the sun doesn't shine, you don't get solar power. And when the wind doesn't blow, you don't get wind power. But the fact of the matter is the fossil fuels have always been intermittent at their own levels, but now battery storage technology is increasing, rapidly, and essentially enabling now the storage of massive amounts of energy that could be generated by renewable energy when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, et cetera, and stored for overnight use and use weeks and soon to be even months down the road. And you see this with things like Elon Musk's solar and wind battery farms and production in Australia and the United States. So let me also make in a sense, a nonpartisan or at least a bipartisan comment here, and that is to say that the fossil fuels industry has its influence in both major parties. This is not just Democrats versus Republicans. Republican Party, I think it's safe to say, nobody would argue it is fairly anti-environment in a lot of ways. It's very pro-business, but the fact of the matter is the legacy, the traditional corporatist Democratic Party also has a big hand in essentially almost running obstruction on many of these changes that are needed, because they also are taking oil and gas and even coal money, and also utility money, like First Energy in Ohio. And so this is a very, very much a big political problem, and it is a bipartisan political problem. And that's another thing that these new activist groups have essentially zeroed in on is they're not partisan, they are nonpartisan, but they are very strongly in favor of anybody who supports the environment and very strongly against and oppose anyone who is not. So let me just say a few things about Ohio. There's a lot of issues in Ohio. I don't think anybody here needs to or thinks otherwise. But in terms of power generation, Ohio, sad to say, is notorious in the country in many regards. Ohio is the only state that rolled back its renewable energy efforts back after 2010, and doing things like setting up restrictions for wind power, particularly the so-called setback rule that said that you can't build a wind turbine within a certain distance from a property border or property line, which was completely arbitrary and essentially has significantly set back the wind power industry in this state. Ironically, the state actually is one of the larger producers of wind power related mechanisms and equipment and so forth. And similarly, it hasn't moved fast enough on other forms of renewable energy, choosing in most cases to impede the installation of those various and sundry things. I want to add to that that this has cost the state billions of dollars, essentially, because renewable energy in general is the fastest growing job market in the country and actually in the world. And in addition, there are far more jobs in renewable energy than there are in the fossil fuels industry. And so, a lot of people think that, we're going to lose all these jobs and it's going to be an economic, we're going to be in economic distress if we make this transition, when in fact it's the opposite now. in particular because of this transformation of the technology and the fact that it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more usable and more distributable and all of these things. And so Ohio basically has lost out on a lot of this. And so as a nonpartisan issue, that is objectively true. So what else does Ohio have going? One of the things that it also needs to do, in part because of the fracking operations in Ohio, as most of you know, Ohio is a big fracking state, particularly eastern and southern Ohio have geologic formations that where fracking is significant, and fracking primarily deals with methane, natural gas extraction, and unfortunately, because of that, Ohio is a major emitter not just of carbon pollution but also of methane, which is a far more potent greenhouse gas than even carbon dioxide is. So this is another thing that that needs to be dealt with at the state, but also the federal level, to come up with standards to oversee and regulate these fracking operations, because they release tremendous amounts of so-called fugitive emissions of methane, and it's really bad for the environment in general. Also, the state needs to move toward renewable energy. It needs to put the infrastructure in for things like electric vehicles. This is a big thing that will allow people to make the transition. By the way, one of the mythologies about electric vehicles is that if they burn electricity that's generated by coal-fired, dirty coal-fired energy plants, that they're no good to anybody. That, in fact, is completely untrue. And as a matter of fact, electric vehicles, pound for pound, burn or consume about a third of the amount of energy of gasoline vehicles. And so even if all the energy is coming from dirty energy sources, as much of it is in Ohio, those electric vehicles are still environmentally desirable. And eventually, as Elon Musk, among others, has been pushing, they're going to be able to be part of the energy grid. And you'll plug your car into the wall, and it will provide energy to the overall system at night, and then draw it in when energy is plentiful during the day. So moving on, drinking water, we all mentioned that. That's an important thing. A lot of problems around the country, but including in Ohio, and water in general. The agricultural runoff and industrial pollutants and so forth all are a risk to aquifers and streams and rivers and lakes. One of the notable things we all know from living in Ohio is toxic algae is a problem. And toxic algae is directly tied to a combination of human and climate change related stuff. As things get hotter, algae loves hot water, and Lake Erie it's the shallowest of the Great Lakes, and therefore heats up more fast than the other deeper lakes. And so the algae would benefit just simply from the heating, but also in combination the farming practices and also industrial runoff as well send things into the lakes and rivers, including Erie, that toxic algae loves, and particularly agricultural practices that involve putting the fertilizer on top of the soil rather than mulching it into the soil, allows for runoff into the lakes, and essentially that fertilizer fertilizes the algae. And so we've all seen what a problem that is for our drinking water and tourism and all the rest. Another issue related to water, aging infrastructure. Ohio is not alone in this by any stretch, but has all around the state aging infrastructure that mirrors the national failure to invest in keeping up the existing infrastructure for water and wastewater and runoff and drinking water and so forth, but also to not modernize it. And the city of Akron is one obvious example. I'm sure many of you know Akron put off doing a revamp of its runoff and water management system, and then was forced by the EPA to put in this $2.5 billion project at least, and that's about a project that's been going on for years and years now, as anyone who's walked down to the Cuyahoga River knows. So all around the country, this is a problem, including in this area. Mining operations as well, down, not just fracking, but mining operations down in southern Ohio are a big issue for clean water, and climate change is adding to that also, but many of the water systems are underfunded down there, aging infrastructure, and this is essentially, of course, having a larger burden on people with low income than on others, but it's in general a problem. Also, some of you may have read about agricultural runoff, that including pesticides that can leach into the water, and also more recently is the issue of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, PAFAS. And last year, Governor DeWine, Republican Governor DeWine, directed the Ohio EPA to try to deal with this, try to analyze the prevalence of these PFAS, these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, because they come from industrial sites. They're particularly used in consumer goods like waterproof, stain-resistant, non-stick kinds of products, but that includes things like cosmetics, fast food packaging, and as the case may be, particularly from military bases, Air Force bases and other bases, firefighting foam is contains, or at least the current firefighting foam that's used most readily, contains extensive foam that of these toxic foams, and the runoff punchline is that it can essentially leak in even into the aquifers. In other words, contaminate the aquifers from which people get well water and the like. And this is, these things are used on flammable liquids such as jet fuels. So this is going to be a long-range problem. But the sad fact is that they are very persistent environmentally, and they cause things like infertility, learning disabilities in children, hormone interference, hormone disruptors, as they're called. They can increase people's cholesterol levels. So there's some significant and growing evidence to speculate that these types of chemicals may actually be partly responsible for the health of people around the country. They're raising their cholesterol, increasing their likelihood to become obese, and of course to have metabolic issues like heart disease, diabetes, and so forth. So to be continued. Also, they're carcinogens. So anyway, this is one of the things in the state of Ohio related to the Air Force Base down south, but also other facilities. And you all know the part about the need to restore the healthy lakes, rivers, and wetlands, and that's been an ongoing issue for a long time. But climate change, to circle back, is devastating a lot of the forests in the Midwest and Ohio, all around the country. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, for the devastating wildfires on the West Coast, is that the forests out there are having tremendous environmental pressure from the heating and from droughts and so forth, which then make the forests weaker and more susceptible to pests, like boring beetles and so forth. And then when the fires come through, all of these dead trees are essentially fuel for these massive record-breaking wildfires. And I don't know if you've seen the stats recently, but California this year will have wildfires that are epic and largest in history. But the cumulative damage from these wildfires just this year will exceed the last 5 years of record-breaking wildfires in the end from the estimations. So warmer temperatures, precipitation uncertainties, and so forth. So let's see. So yeah, a big part of the politics of Ohio environmentalism is dealing with the existing things that we have, the forests and the aquifers and the atmosphere and so forth, and trying to protect those, as well as trying to push for the transformation of Ohio to a environmentally friendly paradigm and with the renewables. So reforestation and fairness, even green spaces in urban areas is important for reducing people's susceptibility to heat, because this is one of the things, by the way, that is going to be a big issue for a lot of states, and including Ohio, is that increasingly we're going to see more and more heat waves. And in urban areas, particularly urban areas without green space, without parks and so forth, and particularly people who are income challenged, poor people and working class people often don't have any access to green space or very little. That all affects the damage from heat events. And the estimation is that by around 2050 to 2070, possibly even before, Ohio is going to be essentially the equivalent in terms of climate as Texas is right now. In other words, we will be as hot as Texas, we'll get as many heat waves, and that will not be pleasant for those of us who like temperate climates. So this is a big issue. As the case may be, Ohio is probably going to be one of the less affected areas in the country, but it's still going to be significantly affected, and we're already seeing some of what's going on. So, so what about the politics of all this? And how can you be involved? I mean, the obvious answer to it, the simplest answer is to vote for politicians who are going to promote the environment, who attend to these basic pollution issues and also to the issue of climate change. And again, I want to note that there's a lot of politicians in both parties who have kind of either paid lip service to it or danced around it without actually doing enough. And so basically, a big part of this is to hold them accountable, right? To basically make them deal with this issue. And again, that's what the current activism is about, to essentially say, no, we're not going to just elect the least damaging politician. We're going to make those politicians do, act on these issues. And so you see that increasingly happening. Even in the Republican Party, there's now a move to, by many of the more or less conservative members of the Republican Party nationally at the state level and so forth, to take the climate issue seriously, because among other things, your generation and a generation, and those older than you, anybody under 35 or 40, basically believes that this is one of the most important issues in their lifetimes, and justifiably so. And many of these politicians are realizing that pressure from constituents or constituents refusing to vote for them is a problem if they don't address these issues. So make your voices heard, basically. I'm sure you all know about, horrifying national news about the corruption in Columbus, including the First Energy scandal, where millions of dollars in bribes were paid basically to bail out First Energy. It's declining and obsolete nuclear and coal industry. And more than $1 billion basically of taxpayer money was used to bail out First Energy, and then it turned out that they had been bribing the speaker and other politicians in Columbus. So that's one thing, is to in terms of holding them accountable. Other related issues. I'm sure you all know that at least for the University of Akron proper, Tim Ryan is the current congressperson. He's got a fairly good, sort of moderate, increasingly progressive environmental record. He's currently running against Christina Hagan, the Republican, in the 13th district. So if you live on campus or nearby, you may be one of his constituents or otherwise. So voting at the state level, at the local level, and obviously at the national level for pro-environmental politicians is one of the most important things you can do. And that, that's not just that's an activism issue. That's an issue orientation as opposed to a partisan issue. But obviously, as we know, there is a strong correlation in many of these things. So let me just, I know I'm probably running out of time, but let me just say briefly, for those who might be from Pennsylvania, I grew up in upstate New York, by the way, so I know Pennsylvania pretty well. And Pennsylvania has many of the same issues that we do. Pennsylvania, especially Western PA and Central PA, is a big fracking area, and there has been a large explosion of fracking over the last 15 to 20 years. Interestingly, about Pennsylvania is that the state has, at least up to now, been very pro-fracking. And interestingly enough, earlier this year, there was a massive grand jury investigation into the state's failure to protect communities from fracking and from these other unconventional extraction processes. And and essentially showed that that state officials had been in the pocket of the fracking industry, and many residents had been complaining about this, and about health hazards and water pollution and air pollution and the like. But this report and this grand jury investigation essentially showed the explicit ways in which the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and their Department of Health essentially deliberately turned a blind eye on what was going on. They essentially gaslighted the population and said nothing harmful is happening, when they knew that in fact it was. And they knew that there was a snowballing effect of fracking, but the industry was essentially bribing the leadership to look the other way. And state officials testified even at this grand jury hearing that they were instructed to ignore the health concerns and practices and gloss them over when dealing with the public. Just absolutely outrageous stuff when it comes down to it. Many people suspected that was going on, knew that it was going on, but this really brought it all out in a legal environment that just is horrific even. And Pennsylvania is kind of reeling from that. I believe from that will come significant reform probably in Pennsylvania. We'll see. Interestingly, New York, I won't say much about this, but New York has had a lot of environmental issues, obviously waterway pollution and the like, but it also is a Great Lakes state bordering Lake Ontario and also Erie, as well as the St. Lawrence Seaway has had many of the same water pollution issues and runoff issues, and also harmful algae blooms, HABs as they're called, but other similar issues to Ohio, invasive species like the zebra mussel and the usual air pollution, and again, and I should say rather, New York, however, is the exception to the rule of these three states that we're talking about here, because early on, or not long ago, within the last 10 years, there were lawsuits and legal maneuvers by activists in New York that essentially allowed local areas to ban fracking. And this is unprecedented in most states around the country. The fracking industry had a lot of money, and it was basically David and Goliath. But if anybody's interested, I'm happy to refer you to how that story went in a little short YouTube clip. But look up fracking New York, and you'll see that one of the biggest victories nationally was won by people in New York who, in local communities, simple people, and aided by good lawyers that were interested in protecting their own communities in many cases. And they essentially won against Goliath. They won in the New York Supreme Court the right to have autonomy, which most of us I think would agree is that local people should have autonomy in making these decisions. But in most states they are not allowed that autonomy. But New York is one of the few among them. So I'd be happy to send some resources and links. Aaron had basically said try to give you all links that are unbiased and to which I would basically respond. Given these issues, there's no such thing as an unbiased source per se, but there is objective information, and many of these sites that are advocating for the environment have very good information, repositories and literature and related links. In addition, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, Ohio EPA, also has a lot of information about water, air, and cleanup sites and so forth. Sierra Club Ohio has, if you're interested in looking at their political endorsements, again, Sierra Club, kind of a more conservative, legacy environmental group, but it's got it's done political endorsements in the state separate from its nonprofit status, if anybody wants to go to that as well. The League of Conservation Voters does also kind of a legacy environmental group, does a scorecard for national candidates, Congress and Senate and presidency and so forth and so on. And that's a pretty good source if you're looking to look at people's voting records in general. And of course, groups like Greenpeace and the Sunrise Movement all have a lot of good resources about this activism for anybody who wants to get involved. I want to add and then I'll let us go to questions here or discussion. That if anybody is interested in any of these issues, absolutely feel free to email me and ask. This is near and dear to my heart. Currently working on a book with a colleague of mine on climate security, basically looking at the way in which environmental security, and climate change and all that fits in with homeland security and national security and international security, and making the case that that the transformation of the energy system and similar measures are in fact good for the national security, not just for human security and social justice and all the rest, but for the sake of the nation's overall security. So, steeped in it, happy to chat with anybody, even if it's about a project that you might be doing in the life. All right, I'll leave it at that. Sorry about going over.
That was wonderful. Lots of information. That was perfect. It's okay that you went over. Don't feel bad.
Okay.
So cool. We're going to open it up for questions. So feel free to turn on your microphone and ask questions directly, or throw them in the chat if you want to, and I can ask them.
My question is, what's the fight against the Green New Deal? Like, I understand why businesses would be against it, but why would a normal person be against it?
A normal human being. Well, I mean, I think you already know why politicians would be against it, right? It's because the politics of this are very fraught, and as I say, I don't soft soap this when I say it. People talk about political influence and political power, and I basically will say on this issue, there's just a phenomenal amount of political bribery that goes on. There have been many studies that essentially show that the more money that a congressperson or senator or other Congress critter takes from the oil and gas and utility industries essentially corresponds, lo and behold, to their voting about these issues. And so it spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year, this industry, to bribe politicians to get their way. And so that's one of the reasons that, and as I say, this is bipartisan. Some Democrats do it as well. And or as the case may be, one of the things that the Democratic Party does is it will, by under responding, act to block many of these things. And they'll talk rhetorically about their support for the environment while doing things behind the scenes that either prevent progress or undermine the environment directly, including allowing for oil and gas exploration and all around the world. I mean, no offense to anybody who loves Barack Obama, but Barack Obama was basically a drill baby drill president. I mean, he talked about the environment, particularly later in his administration, but he supported fracking and even coal exports, even though he, toward the end of the administration was seeming to go after the coal industry's tremendously toxic pollution and carbon emissions. But at the same time, he was supporting those many Democrats who were taking money from this industry. Not as much money as the Republican Party, but still a lot of money. So politicians, it's pretty straightforward. We need to put their feet to the fire. In terms of the general population, and of course the oil and gas and coal industry and the utility industries, all supported by think tanks and billionaires like the Koch brothers and from all around the country, all around the world. So there's a phenomenal amount of money, not just from the industries, but also from rich donors that don't want to lose their investment in things like the shale oil operations in North Dakota and Canada and places like that, which are phenomenally environmentally polluting. And so it's a lot about dollars and cents. Just really quickly, the press also collaborates in this quite a bit, and one of the ways they do that is by not necessarily directly denying climate change and the like, but by trying to do this false balance, so trying to seem balanced between the conservative side and the liberal side, and in doing so, basically privilege misinformation about it. Because the debate is not about whether climate change is happening versus whether it is happening. But the actual debate, the scientifically verifiable and objective debate is between people who say that climate change is happening and that maybe it's not that bad and we've got some time to do something about it, and people who are saying climate change is going to kill us all unless we move immediately. That's the actual debate. It's not whether it's happening or whether it's in doubt. It is not in doubt. The science about climate change is irrefutable, extensive since the late 1800s, and this is as close to the law of gravity, or that smoking causes lung cancer and heart disease, as it gets in terms of scientific, a collection of scientific evidence from literally tens of thousands of sources and experts and areas around the world and so forth. So, and so the part of the problem is that the corporate press, in part because many of these corporations that run these press outlets are owned by umbrella companies that have an interest in the oil and gas industry or the utility industry and investments, but also in part because they don't want to make waves. There is a tremendous silence about these issues. Or when they do address them, they will do their equality thing, their effort at balance will be to have somebody promoting climate action and then a climate denier as the other side of it, right? And so what impression do people get when they watch a television show that is essentially has, you know, the objective facts represented versus objectively untruth by climate deniers, is that people conclude that, you know, well, the jury's still out about climate change, right? And this is shown in the polls that the population, a majority of Americans believe that only 50%, about half of climate scientists believe that climate change is happening, when in fact that number is 99.99%, right? And so the public believes there's more debate, far more debate than there really is. So that's part of it. The press colludes, the politicians collude, and the American public sort of blithely goes along, not realizing how dire this situation is. So to go back to the Green New Deal, that's why it's opposed. The other reason is because a lot of conservatives don't like public spending, don't like government spending, which will be required for the Green New Deal to invest in the infrastructure. Now, of course, and to balance social justice and to give people jobs and so forth. But much as back during the original Green New Deal, that will essentially power up the American economy. Austerity, cutting government spending in this case is going to hurt the economy. But there are a lot of ideologues out there, including actually many Democrats, who believe in this trickle-down economics. That if you if you have a deficit, that's going to destroy the economy and create inflation and so forth. Most of that's been thoroughly debunked. In fact, you need to spend money. Government needs to spend money when the economy is at a down point in order to juice it. And we see that debate right now about the COVID-related bailout and whether it should happen. And so anyway, it's a complicated tapestry of why we are where we are. But one of the worst effects of all of this, unfortunately, is that people just don't realize how bad it is. I mean, your generation does far more than your elders, but I just can't tell you how many baby boomers I run into who just don't, it's like, yeah, this is an issue, and even though the baby boomer generation, of which I unfortunately am part at the tail end, has been responsible by far for most of the carbon pollution. They sort of think that, well, I don't really have to do anything. Other people do that. Anyway, too long an answer to your question. But anybody else on that, or reaction to that?
I have a question. So I've talked to some baby boomer aged people, and they think that something like the New Deal would raise their taxes a tremendous amount, and they don't want to pay it because they're not going to be here. It's not their issue. So I was just wondering how I could express, besides the fact that they care about me and that I'm going to have to grow up in a world like this, like how can I get them to care?
Let me ask you first, is this family or friends?
Yeah.
It is? All right. Well, apologies to your family or friends. But that, on the face of it, that is a phenomenally narcissistic and selfish perspective. Because, I mean, what are our older generations supposed to do but to pave the way for future generations to flourish, right? Your generation, and I don't mean to depress you here in the midst of everything that's going on, but your generation is the first generation since World War II that is going to be worse off than your parents. And any baby boomer who tells you, well, you guys have got it easier, you don't have it that bad, or stop eating avocado toast, or whatever the hell they try to do, or that y'all are lazy. Honestly, maybe not to your family or friends, but I tell them to go to hell, because quite frankly, they are literally the most privileged generation in human history, right? Having grown up in the richest country in the world, and they've benefited phenomenally. Their education was cheap, their housing was cheap. They could work a minimum wage job back, when they were younger, and support a family of 4. I mean, what are the chances of doing that now? 0, right? And there were more jobs in general and more opportunity in general back when they were going through all this. And you all are saddled with enormous amounts of education. That, as a generation, the inability to get cheap housing as they were, and the list goes on. And of course, the job market is far less friendly and robust than it was back in their day. So this is reason to fight hard and fight back, right? I mean, if it's somebody you care about, I would be maybe a little more diplomatic than I just was, but it's one of the things that enrages me, because I just don't understand how anybody could say, oh, I don't want to pay more taxes. The taxes, by the way, one of the other things they benefited from is the taxes are far lower than they have been since World War II right now, for their generation, or for them and otherwise. The marginal tax rate for the richest people in the country back during the 1950s and 60s, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Republican, the marginal tax rate for the richest millionaires back then was 90%. In other words, they paid 90% of their income in taxes because they were rich, and essentially society said, you've benefited tremendously from all the things that we provide, the infrastructure and education system and all the rest. You have to pay 90% of your income. That is gone, and so the rich are getting richer, and that includes generationally. That includes the baby boomers. But this is where your generation needs to take to the streets and shove it in their faces, because there's too many baby boomers that I've run across who essentially say, I'm just one person, I'll advocate for this stuff, sure, but I really don't want my taxes to go up, and I don't share any more blame than anybody else does in this. That's absolutely not true. I've pissed off a lot of, pardon me for saying, I've upset a lot of people from my generation, and most of them are older than me. Obviously, I'm really at the tail end, and I renounce any association with the baby boomers. But the bottom line is that they are responsible for something in the neighborhood of 80% of the carbon pollution that has already gone into the environment. And think about that figure. This is 20 years, a generation that's 20 years long, which is roughly what a generation is, and they are have been responsible for 80% of it. In addition to that, I might add, they currently, because they're older, hold the reins of power, right? Most of the most powerful people in the country, be it in business or government or politics or otherwise, are boomers. Now, that's obviously changing, but those people are the most powerful. They're responsible for far more than any other generation, and yet many of them don't want to deal with it, don't want their taxes raised, don't want to be responsible. I just don't understand it. I don't, and and I'm not kidding when I say that for whatever reason, generationally, and don't quote me on this, but it's being recorded, so I guess I'm already quoted. I find that a lot of people in that generation, not everybody, not everybody in the generation, so we're not, this is not elder abuse or discrimination against old people. They just happen to be old, but they are also powerful, and in many cases, they are self-absorbed and narcissistic and selfish in general. So, and honestly, you can tell any baby boomer that I said that, because it's just the truth. But that needs to change. And so, in as much as people from that generation might not be as motivated or might be outright, aggressively opposing change, we all, especially you all, because you have a far greater stake in it, need to get in their faces. And you need to basically say, enough, we're done with this, and take to the streets, get involved in this activism movement. I meant to mention before, by the way, that or sort of follow that point, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, all of those movements have objectively benefited from the aspects of the movement, like ACT UP for the LGBTQ movement, and many organizations back during the women's rights movement that was seeking to get the vote and so forth. They've benefited from civil disobedience and people speaking harshly and loudly, and and trying to make people stand up and listen. And so I'm not saying you should go out and break the law, but definitely it clearly is not working for people to just go and politely talk to their congresspeople and representatives. It has to go beyond that. So yes, I'm not saying break the law, but you get what I mean. So anyway, I'm sorry to hear that you have to deal with that, Megan. You're absolutely not the first person who said that. I can't tell you how many young people have said that to me, that family or friends who are older just don't want to deal with it. You help me explain it. I just don't get it, but I am thoroughly disgusted with the generational reaction to this from their generation. And by the way, extremely encouraged by your generation, and roughly plus and minus, right? Including the Gen Z and the late Gen X, much of which is behind these issues. Keith, you're laughing. Go ahead. Anyway, but so sorry about that long-winded answer to that, but needless to say, it really is, I think, one of the biggest impediments to much of this. And these are people who consider themselves to be liberal. But if you say, I don't want my taxes raised to save the world, that's not liberal, that's conservative. And so a lot of these people who maybe when they were young, maybe in the 60s or 70s or, or the 80s or whenever, when they were young, maybe they were activists and idealists, but they've lost it. They sold out basically. And, and they should welcome their taxes being raised if it will save actually them included, because a lot of this stuff is happening now, but also save, their children and grandchildren and the like. I'm mystified. So anyway, anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes,
if we go to an altruistic, selfless mindset, kindness type of mindset towards the environment,
yep.
and create an ecological economy and go away from the capitalist and socialist based economy, today's economy, wouldn't we do like a completely 180 to reduce, get our environment back?
That's a great question, and that's one of the arguments as you sort of frame there that cynics and and opponents of it will frame. I'm not saying you're that way, but the answer is no. This is not 180. The fact of the matter is that the capital system has obviously been responsible for the vast majority of this, right? Part of the problem with capitalism, one of its inherent flaw, is that it doesn't take into account the inadvertent effects of what happens in capitalism, right? It's all about markets. What the price of something is, who can afford it, and it does not account for things like carbon pollution, because that's what they call an externality. And so, but that said, these things are going to be a major detriment to the current model, capitalist or otherwise. They essentially are going to bring down capitalism eventually. But capitalism can exist as long as it has elements of socialism per se, right? Government involvement in the social welfare safety net, in investment in critical infrastructure and the like, to juice the private sector. It easily can reside alongside these issues, but it has to be a different type of capitalism, is the punchline there. And so this is where capitalists, many capitalists now, many corporations, some of them are faking it. They're just greenwashing their images and so forth, but many corporations now, and especially many investors, be they countries or investment groups, are realizing that fossil fuels is a bad investment, and that it is going to collapse at some point. It may be a slow collapse, it may be a fast collapse, but in addition, investors and and major entities that take place in the capitalist system are recognizing that in the even short to medium term, a lot of what's going on now is going to damage the economy, the world economy. And I could send you some figures on that, but trillions and trillions of dollars is going to be lost eventually from the international economy unless we do something about this for a variety of reasons. And so in many ways, the analogy back to the original New Deal with Franklin Delano Roosevelt applies. Roosevelt basically saved capitalism from itself by helping people get back on their feet after the Great Depression, because there would have been a much stronger opposition to it had people continued to suffer. And by putting people back to work and by building infrastructure that was important for the economy and that we still, in many cases, benefit from, he basically, by using government as a seed mechanism and as a way to push this stuff that keeps capitalism moving, because that's the thing. Libertarians, just don't get that capitalism relies on public goods. It relies on public infrastructure and roads and bridges and dams and the electrical system and everything. The communication system, the internet was created by government, for God's sake, right? Government investment in these things is a way to keep capitalism from going too far in overusing resources or underinvesting in critical things like the education system included, especially, right? That are needed to keep capitalism going. And so it's definitely not an either or. And the fact is, we do not live, by the way, in a pure capitalist society by any stretch. We live in a mixed economy, which has elements of socialism, right? Social things, or programs and infrastructure and so forth supported by the public sector, by government, as well as, most of the infrastructure is private, but that part that's public is essentially the stuff that the private sector either can't or won't provide. And those two are the yin and yang of capitalism, of sensible capitalism. And if anybody's interested, Steve included, I've got make this point very much like that. They essentially say in times when things are down and even when times are good, government investment as the oil in the economy to provide these things that would otherwise be less provided, underprovided by capitalists, by private sector, is the very thing that keeps societies going. And in addition, by the way, income inequality and a lot of where we stand right now, there's the gap between the poor and the rich in this country and around the world is the highest that it's been since before the Great Depression. And so income inequality also is an economic burden to the overall economy, as well as, unfortunately, it's been directly shown to undermine democracy and to potentially lead to social unrest and even revolutions. So these things are the characteristics of the current capitalism, but they are not the fundamental characteristics of capitalism generally. And capitalism can reside alongside socialism, democratic socialism, and democracy at the same time, and save the planet. And that's the way we do it. This is not, becoming communist, which is what a lot of people want you to believe. This is essentially doing what we've always done and doing it on a grand scale, much like the original New Deal, much like the space program. Any of these huge investments by government essentially were a tremendous boon to the private sector, to capitalism. Anyway, sorry, I go on. Kayla.
Okay, so when you talk about like government funding or the government putting money into the economy, what specifically, I guess, are you talking, like what specific acts are you talking about? Because when I think of it, I think of like them bailing out GM, or you know what I mean?
Right. Yep. I mean, that certainly is one area, right? But I mean, think about all the things that government has paid for, right? I mean, a national highway system, which by the way, at the time in the 1950s was marketed to Congress and to the American people as a security related thing, as a way to fight the Russians, so that we would have big, major highways on which the tank carriers could drive, so that you can get around the country more easily in case we were invaded or something like that. But the bottom line is the biggest boon clearly was to the economy, right? And as we know, the trucking industry and just tourism, I mean, just, think about all the things just from the national highway system alone that have benefited from that. But also electrification, back in the old days, people lived on farms, they didn't have electricity. Also good for the economy. Government has been involved historically in investing in hydroelectric dams to generate electricity, and at least some of the infrastructure involved in that, and obviously roads, bridges, dams, the postal service, and the list goes on. And also, as the case may be, social welfare safety nets, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid is a program that is actually funded mostly by the American public, by tax dollars, but you contribute to that, in your paycheck deductions. But that system is an insurance program run by the government that would not be able to exist in the private sector at that level. And so all of these things essentially not only provide for health, wealth, and safety to people, but they also help keep the economy moving. They keep people from being permanently disabled or permanently booted from the job market. I know it's controversial in some circles, but having a universal healthcare system, which, by the way, the majority of the Western world has at some level, would also be a tremendous boon for capitalism, because it would essentially allow people who are stuck in their jobs because they have health insurance to be able to move to a more efficient job, something that better fits their skills, or move out of the area. But people are tethered by their private health insurance, which is getting to be increasingly lousy because it's a for-profit system, and so having government involvement in a variety of ways in that doesn't have to be complete government involvement, but having government essentially grease the wheels of reducing that profit motive. And as the case may be, if Obamacare is gone, people with pre-existing conditions, which, by the way, is 40% of the American public has a pre-existing condition of some type, including old age, it would essentially shelter those people and make society function better. Also, by the way, as part of that, this is an economy that is predominantly consumer-oriented, right? 60 to 70% of the American economy is consumer-based, and so if consumers don't have money to spend, then the economy suffers. And so, to go back to Steve's point, by helping people, by increasing social justice, and by putting them to work when possible in infrastructure projects that are going to be a tremendous boon, not just to the American economy and its functioning, but also to American industry and science and to the world, is a no-brainer investment, really, because the private sector will never invest in that sufficiently in the time frame that we need. Especially, that said, solar energy, wind power, cheaper than fossil fuels, and that's why the transition is happening anyway, from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but it's not happening fast enough. It's being impeded by opponents who are being bribed and legislate, in the government. And one of the reasons we need government involvement in that, in the energy system transformation, is because it's not happening fast enough. We need to, we really need to juice that. We wasted so much time during the baby boomer generation, by the way, not doing anything, and now it's a dire problem. It's literally a crisis, and so government needs to step in to get that moving, to juice it, with tax breaks and investments, and there's a whole bunch of good stuff that's going on, including in Ohio, by the way. Columbus and many cities in Ohio are investing or making the pledge to transition to renewable energy, and this is another area that you all could get involved in, is pushing your cities or your towns to make that pledge, because the punchline again is not only is it good to, for saving the polar bears, but it's good for saving the humans, and it is cheaper to make that transition. Those are the cheapest energy sources, and in addition, you're going to put to work people who would otherwise not have jobs, because those industries employ far more people than fossil fuels does. The declining legacy fossil fuels industry does not employ anywhere near the number of people as renewables does. So, give people people cheaper energy, make the system more efficient, put people to work. You know, what's not to love about at least that aspect of the Green New Deal in my mind. I don't know if that addresses your question, Kayla, or your comment, but that's cool. Anybody else? Comments, or anybody want to push back on anything I said? You know, tell me to go to hell, even though I've been criticizing baby boomers. Keith, I know you do, but just kidding. So,
I have a question. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Okay,
that wasn't my question, by the way.
No, I know.
So, like, just looking at the ballot for this year, like, I noticed Howie Hawkins is on there, and he markets himself as the original Green New Dealer. He's, you know, just seems out of the options. He's the one that cares the most about the environment, and you know, that's something that I value. So I would want to give him my vote. But so many people tell me, if you vote for a third party candidate, you're throwing your vote away.
Yeah,
and I guess I just would like to hear kind of your stance on that.
That's cool. No, it's a great question, especially for people who want to promote a progressive, sensible agenda, right? And so, and by the way, I want to tell you, you probably have discerned this, but I'm pretty progressive myself. And so I struggled with this and have struggled with it for years, because the Democratic Party is essentially a conservative party by definition, by nature. You know, it's basically been moving right for 40 years, even as the Republican Party has also been moving right. And essentially the Democrats as a whole don't represent the majority of the country, and the Republicans certainly don't either. And so, there is a tremendous thirst for having a party that represents the majority of Americans and workers and middle class even. And it really doesn't exist to a large extent now. So I, as you, Michaela, I believe that at least to some extent, third party, or at least actually to a large extent, third party movement in this country needs to happen to put the screws to the other major parties. Now, the problem is, although I did tell Aaron and Kayla not to go into the presidential election, which I'm not really, but the problem is at that level, it's winner take all, right? And one of my problems with the Green Party is that they have always, you know, no offense, I've got a lot of friends who are Greens, and I completely sympathize with the agenda, and I believe in the agenda, but they've been politically lazy in a lot of ways, and they haven't built the infrastructure. They haven't started at the grassroots, at the local and state levels, to try to build, you know, to groom, you know, people to move up into the system, and to try to actually create a viable third party. So I completely agree with the Greens agenda, but politically they have not been pragmatic, and in many ways, part of the problem now is that we don't have 20 years to get this third party movement going, because, you know, we're dead in 20 years if we don't, I mean, not actually dead, but, you know, we're in big trouble if we don't move fast on this stuff. So the main thing that we need to do, without naming names, is to avoid catastrophe. And if you live in a swing state, you need to think about the implications that you mentioned, which I will not further articulate. Whereas, you know, if you know, I lived in California for a long time. I'm from New York. You know, I could afford to vote third party in those states because it didn't make any difference, right? But in swing states, I think there's more of a, you know, a burden of responsibility for people, you know, on both sides. You know, whatever your political orientation. Really, this election at that level comes down to about 6 states, and everybody else is pretty much going to either go red or blue. So I sympathize with your struggle with that. I totally do. But, you know, again, I won't go further into it, but you get the idea. That things need to happen fast, and whichever party is getting in the way of these things is going to further ensure that we're not going to move fast enough to avert even further damage. We just wasted so much time. 20 or 30 years ago, if we had been on this stuff, which, by the way, there were strong advocates at the time. Jimmy Carter back in 1979 and 1980 was a big advocate of doing the transition, put solar panels on the White House. Ronald Reagan comes in office, takes the solar panels down, and you know, kisses the fossil fuels industry on the lips and says, none of that here, right? We could have been doing stuff, and we could have done it incrementally and slow and methodically, and not been in the position we're in. Things just have to happen fast now, because the environmental changes and the pollution levels, even in just the last 20 years, have been accelerating, not declining. And so it has to happen fast. By the way, I want to add, even countries like China are actually getting in on this stuff. Some of you may not know, China is the largest producer of both solar panels and, I believe, actually wind turbines too. So they because it's part of their transition, because they realize China and its people are going to be hard hit by climate change. They're trying to make the transition, but at the same time not, make people impoverished again. And so they're installing a lot of this stuff, but they're also selling it cheaper and cheaper around the world. And ironically, China, no matter what you may think of them, is one of the reasons that solar panels and wind turbines are as cheap as they are. Anyway, blah blah blah, right? But yeah, so like I say, if this were politics as usual, if this were sort of the old school, I'm just a bill on the hill, kind of politics, I would say, there are certain strategies that would need to be focused on, that Howie Hawkins and people like that would start as much as they could at the grassroots, and some of that is happening among the Greens now, but before it really wasn't, and some of it's because both major parties have essentially oligopoly power over the system. I mean, they have barriers put up all over the place to the entry of another party. So the notion that we could just create a viable third party is just not going to happen under that current system. And so, regrettably, at least at some levels, some of this has to happen through at least one of the major parties, and possibly, increasingly, attitudes are changing in the other party, but too slowly, right? It's all too slow, probably because all those people are baby boomers. So, anyway, does that sort of address where you're talking about, Michaela?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. Is that how you say your name, by the way? Can you, Michaela? Yes, go. So, anybody else? Comments or criticisms? Like I say, always feel free to throw this stuff back in my face, because it's that's how you hone your arguments, is by getting pushback. But there's a whole bunch of stuff involved in this, but I would encourage all of you, regardless of your political positions, to get involved in this, because I want to add that even though at the moment, on average, that the environmental issues are very partisan in nature, right? The Democrats more support the environmental issues, the Republicans less. Your generation of Republicans, on the other hand, a majority of Republican people that are under 35 or 40 believe that climate change is happening, and that's a serious problem. So they, everybody in those generations roughly believe that climate change is happening, believe that it's a nonpartisan issue. So it's mostly the older people who have made an issue of this, and again, people who have a stake in the survival and continuing exploitation of the fossil fuels industry are particularly behind it. And there's a lot more to it. The Senate is a major impediment to national change, and so a lot of the change that's happening now has to happen, and is happening at the state and local levels. As people, states like California and Washington State and Oregon, and around the country, states are making these investments at the state level and at the local levels, and making the transition. And again, I'll leave you with this one last little story that you may not have heard. That demonstrates the nonpartisan nature of this. In Florida, where the Koch brothers and the oil and gas industry and utility industry have been opposing solar panels and solar and wind and so forth, and trying to set up regulatory and legislative barriers, the Green Party, which is obviously pro-environment, teamed up with the Tea Party, which is very conservative, right, overall. But members of the Tea Party are also, in many cases, libertarians who believe that if they want to set up a damn solar panel on their house or whatever, or have cheap utility, electricity, then they should be able to do it without impediment. The Tea Party teamed up with the Green Party to essentially oppose these industrial efforts to block renewable energy. And anybody want to guess what they called themselves? The Green Tea Party. Anyway, but you know, that's the reality, is that it's not an economic issue. It's well, it is an economic issue, but not for the reasons that opponents claim. It's really ultimately a nonpartisan humanity, you know, national security, human security issue that everybody, no matter what your political affiliation, is going to benefit from the faster it happens, really in the end. And so again, I want to emphasize that there are members now of the Republican Party, particularly those who have younger constituents, even those who are coming up in the ranks in the Republican Party, who believe that this is a nonpartisan issue, that climate change is one of the most, or the most important issue of our lifetimes, even of humanity in general, and that something needs to happen. So here's to it. Get out there and be part of it. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, hope you didn't mind me blathering on there, but it's great to see you all. And anytime I can help out in any way, please let me know, because I have much lingering fond feeling for the University of Akron, and I'd love to continue to be a part of it. But also, obviously, issues like this are a big part of my research and teaching, and I want to take part in the dialogue wherever it happens. Okay. And by the way, you know, I especially ESW and the environmental groups on campus, I was at least associated with in some way, or dealt with, as Keith knows. I tried to undermine them from inside. No, just kidding. So keep me posted, and I'm sincere. If anybody is working on a project or something where they might need some feedback or advice or information or sources, just let me know, okay? And I'd be happy to help out. So, and Kayla and Aaron have my email. Don't send it to my Akron email, because I barely use that anymore, even though I still technically have it. Send it either to my Gmail or my University of New Hampshire email. Okay, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
All good?
Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Looking forward to keep in touch with you guys, and we'll talk soon. Great to see you all.
Good to see you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Oh, yeah, great to see you, Keith. Say hi to everybody, yeah, and
Thank
to all the
you.
gang there. My pleasure. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Perfectly.
Thank
Talk soon,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn this meeting, I would just like to say ESW is probably going to send out some sort of post-meeting form, like survey kind of thing. So just please be looking out for that in your emails, guys, just so that if we host an event like this in the future, we can make it, you know, even better than this one, although it's kind of hard to top because this was awesome. But
There's
just
a lot of swear words in your feedback, by the way.
but just please look out in your emails for those guys for the next, I don't know, week or so. We'll probably get something out to you.
All right, guys. Go slow. Fight the good fight. Keep those masks on. All right. I'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone, for coming.
All right. My pleasure.
You gotta stop recording.
Thanks.